My name is Jenna, and I'm 32 years old. I never imagined my wedding day would end with me walking out on my new husband. But when my mother-in-law suddenly demanded my entire $8,500 monthly salary and every bonus at our reception, something inside me snapped. The worst part wasn't her outrageous demand. It was seeing Thomas, the man I had just vowed to spend my life with, standing silently by her side. That moment changed everything. I lifted my wedding dress, turned around, and walked straight out the door. What happened next would shock us all. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from. In the comments, hit that like and subscribe button if you want to see more stories about standing up for yourself. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, with parents who taught me the value of hard work and independence. My childhood was relatively normal until I lost my dad to pancreatic cancer when I was 16. Watching him deteriorate over those final months was devastating, but it also taught me how fragile life can be. After his death, my mum Diana had to work 2 jobs to keep us afloat. I saw firsthand how financial insecurity could impact everything. This experience shaped me in profound ways. I became determined to create stability for myself, working part-time jobs throughout high school to save for college. I was lucky enough to earn a partial scholarship to study computer science, but still graduated with substantial student loans. Those first few years after college were tough. I lived in a tiny studio apartment with secondhand furniture, ate ramen more often than I'd like to admit, and put every spare dollar toward paying down my debt. My first job in the tech industry paid modestly, but I worked relentlessly, taking on extra projects and learning new skills on weekends. Gradually, I climbed from junior developer to mid-level and finally to senior developer at one of Portland's fastest-growing software companies. By the time I met Thomas, I was earning $500 a month, had finally paid off my student loans, and was building a healthy savings account. This financial independence wasn't just about money. It represented security, freedom, and the fulfillment of promises I'd made to myself after watching my mother struggle. I met Thomas at a regional tech conference where he was representing his financial investment firm. He approached me after my presentation on secure payment systems, and we instantly connected. Thomas was charming, intelligent, and ambitious. With his sharp suits and confident demeanor, he seemed like someone who had everything figured out. Our conversation flowed effortlessly from technology to our personal lives, and by the end of the evening, he'd asked for my number. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant downtown. Thomas was attentive, asking thoughtful questions and actually listening to my answers. He spoke about his work in finance with passion and shared stories about his family that made me laugh. Unlike previous men I'd dated, who seemed intimidated by my career, Thomas appeared genuinely impressed by my accomplishments. The relationship progressed quickly. Within 3 months, we were spending nearly every weekend together. At 6 months, we were talking about the future. By 8 months, he proposed moving in together, arguing that it made financial sense since we were always at each other's places anyway. I agreed, and we found a beautiful apartment with views of the city. We discovered we had similar backgrounds. Like me, Thomas came from a middle-class family. His father, Robert, worked in construction management, while his mother, Eleanor, had been a school administrator before retiring. Thomas had worked hard for his success too, though his path had been somewhat smoother than mine. We talked about our shared dreams of buying a house, possibly in one of Portland's quieter neighborhoods, with space for a home office and maybe a garden. My first meeting with Thomas's parents came about 3 months into our relationship. Thomas had spoken so warmly about them that I was excited to make a good impression. We drove to their suburban home for Sunday dinner, and initially, everything seemed fine. Eleanor welcomed me with a hug that felt slightly stiff, but not overtly hostile. Robert was quieter but friendly, asking about my work with what seemed like genuine interest. As dinner progressed, Eleanor began asking questions that felt increasingly pointed. She wanted to know exactly what my job entailed, how stable the company was, and what my long-term career goals might be. When Thomas mentioned my recent promotion, Eleanor smiled tightly and said, "That's nice, dear, but have you two discussed family planning? Technical careers can be so demanding for mothers." On the drive home, I mentioned to Thomas that his mother seemed concerned about my career. He laughed and said, "That's just how Mom is. She's old-fashioned about some things, but she means well." I accepted this explanation, wanting to believe the best. Over the following months, I noticed more concerning behaviors. Eleanor would call Thomas multiple times a day, often about financial matters. Once I overheard her asking if he could loan her money for a new refrigerator, despite the fact that his parents seemed financially comfortable. Thomas immediately agreed without discussion. When I later asked about it, He explained that he'd been helping his parents financially since his first job. "Mum has always managed the family finances," Graham, he said. "Dad just goes along with whatever she wants." This dynamic became clearer when we visited for Thomas's birthday. Throughout the evening, Robert deferred to Eleanor on everything from when to serve dinner to what gifts Thomas should open first. At one point, Eleanor mentioned that Thomas had helped them refinance their mortgage recently. "He's such a good son," she said, patting his hand, always taking care of his family responsibilities. When Thomas proposed after a year together, I was overjoyed. We agreed on a 9-month engagement to give us time to plan a wedding that would blend our preferences. Almost immediately, Eleanor inserted herself into the process. She had opinions about everything from the venue to the flowers, and frequently made comments like, "Well, in our family, we always do it this way." The guest list became a particular battleground. Thomas and I had agreed on a moderate-sized wedding with around 100 guests. Eleanor produced her own list of 75 people, many of whom neither Thomas nor I knew well. When I suggested trimming her list, Thomas avoided conflict by saying, "It's easier to just go along with what she wants. Trust me, I've learnt that over the years." Even my wedding dress became a point of contention. When Eleanor heard about the dress I'd fallen in love with, she immediately asked about the price. Upon learning it cost $2,200, she huffed, "That seems extravagant for something you'll wear once." I found my dress on sale and Robert and I just celebrated our 35th anniversary. The fact that my mother and I were splitting the cost of the dress didn't seem to matter to her. Throughout the wedding planning, my mum noticed Eleanor's controlling behaviour, but kept her concerns mostly to herself, not wanting to create additional tension. However, after a particularly difficult meeting with the caterers, where Eleanor had contradicted nearly every choice I made, my mum gently suggested, "Honey, are you sure you're okay with how much influence his mother has? It seems like you're compromising on a lot of your wishes." My best friend Alison was less diplomatic. After witnessing Eleanor belittle my ideas for the 10th time, she pulled me aside and said, "Jenna, I'm worried. This woman is steamrolling you, and Thomas isn't doing anything about it. If she's this controlling about the wedding, what will she be like once you're married?" I brushed off her concerns, convinced that things would improve after the wedding, when Eleanor would have less reason to be involved in our lives. How wrong I was. As Thomas and I prepared to merge our lives completely, we needed to have serious financial discussions. We initially agreed to contribute equally to household expenses, with some adjustments based on our income differences. Thomas earned about $7,000 monthly to my $8,500, so we worked out a proportional system that felt fair to both of us. We planned to maintain separate accounts while creating a joint account for shared expenses. However, our first major financial disagreement came when I discovered Thomas had significant credit card debt. He'd been vague about his finances previously, but as we discussed buying a home in the future, I pressed for more transparency. He reluctantly revealed he owed nearly $30,000 across 3 credit cards. "How did you accumulate so much debt?" I asked, trying to keep judgment from my voice. We both earned good salaries, and he didn't have student loans like I had. Thomas looked embarrassed. "It's complicated. Some of it is from helping my parents with expenses. Mom sometimes needs things, and it's just easier to put it on my card than argue with her." This led to me discovering that Thomas gave his mother money regularly. Not small amounts either, but $500 to $1,000 loans that were never repaid. When I expressed concern about this pattern, Thomas became defensive. "She's my mother, Jenna. What am I supposed to do? Say no when she needs help?" "But does she actually need help?" I asked. "Your parents have their house paid off. Your dad still works. Your mum has a pension. Why do they need your money every month?" Thomas couldn't provide a clear answer. Worse, I learned that Eleanor had online access to Thomas's bank accounts in case of emergency. When I suggested he remove her access, he acted as if I'd asked him to disown his family entirely. "You don't understand our family dynamic," he said. "It's always been this way. Mum handles the finances for everyone. It's just easier." After several tense discussions, Thomas promised things would change after we were married. He agreed to work on paying down his debt and setting better boundaries with Eleanor. "Once we're married, you'll be my priority," he assured me. "Mum will have to understand that things are different now." I wanted to believe him. Maybe I needed to believe him because the alternative meant acknowledging that the man I loved was deeply enmeshed in an unhealthy family system. So I chose to trust his promises of change, despite the warning bells ringing in my mind. 2 months before the wedding, Thomas's parents hosted an engagement dinner for us. The evening started pleasantly enough with Eleanor seemingly on her best behaviour. Then over dessert, she made an announcement that blindsided me. "Thomas, I've booked your honeymoon as our wedding gift, 2 weeks at that lovely resort in Maui you always wanted to visit. All-inclusive ocean view suite, the works." My heart sank. Thomas and I had already discussed our honeymoon plans. We'd decided on a modest trip to a cabin in the mountains, planning to save our money for a house down payment. We'd never mentioned wanting to go to Maui. Thomas looked surprised but pleased. "Wow, Mum, that's incredibly generous." Eleanor beamed. "Nothing but the best for my son. Of course we put the deposit down, but the final payment is due next month. It's quite expensive, but I thought perhaps Jenna wouldn't mind contributing from her savings since she makes such a good salary. After all, it's for both of you to enjoy." The room went silent. I felt ambushed and looked to Thomas, expecting him to explain that we'd already made other plans, or at least to point out how inappropriate it was to volunteer my savings. Instead, he smiled uncertainly and said, "We'll figure it out, Mum. It sounds amazing." Later that night, we had our first serious fight. I couldn't believe Thomas hadn't defended our original plans, or at least consulted me before accepting such an expensive gift with strings attached. "You just sat there while your mother volunteered my savings for a trip we never discussed," I said, trying to keep my voice down in his parents' guest room. "She was trying to do something nice," Thomas argued. "And it is a great resort. I've always wanted to go there." "That's not the point. We agreed on a mountain cabin. We agreed to save for a house. And your mother knew that because you told me you discussed our plans with her." Thomas's expression shifted to one of guilt. I might have mentioned to her that I'd always dreamed of a tropical honeymoon, but didn't think we could afford it. That's when I realized this wasn't an impulsive gesture by Eleanor. It was a calculated move to assert control over our decisions with Thomas's implicit approval. The argument continued when we got home, with Thomas eventually breaking down and begging for understanding. "I know my relationship with my mom is complicated," he admitted. "But after the wedding, things will be different. I promise. We'll be our own family and I'll set better boundaries. Just please don't call off the wedding over this." Against my better judgment, I accepted his promises. We compromised on the honeymoon, agreeing to go to Maui, but for 1 week instead of 2, with costs split between his parents' contribution and our own savings. A month before the wedding, both families gathered for a casual barbecue at my mother's house. Everything was going relatively smoothly until the conversation turned to finances after the wedding. My mother had innocently asked if we'd considered a prenuptial agreement, given that we both had established careers. Eleanor's expression hardened. "A prenup? That sounds like you're already planning for a divorce before they even marry. In our family, we believe in complete trust." Before my mother could respond, Eleanor continued. "Besides, once they're married, they'll combine all their finances anyway. That's what marriage means. Jenna will understand her responsibility to the family." The way she emphasized responsibility to the family sent a chill through me. I looked at Thomas, who was suddenly very interested in his plate of food. After dinner, Thomas's brother Michael pulled me aside while we were clearing dishes. "Listen, Jenna," he said quietly, checking to make sure Eleanor wasn't nearby. "I probably shouldn't say anything, but be careful. My mother has always controlled the family money, even what Dad earns. She did the same with me until I finally put my foot down, which caused a huge rift. She's got her sights set on your income, and Thomas has never been good at standing up to her." Later, Michael's wife Sarah shared her own experiences. When Michael and I first married, Eleanor expected to have access to our bank accounts. She would call asking for loans constantly. It took us moving 3 states away to finally break free. Thomas is much more under her influence than Michael ever was. These warnings left me deeply unsettled. That night I confronted Thomas with what I'd heard. "Is your mother expecting to have access to my salary after we're married?" I asked directly. Thomas looked uncomfortable. "Of course not. That's ridiculous." "Then why did she talk about my responsibility to the family? And why did Michael warn me about her financial control?" Thomas sighed. "Michael has always had issues with Mom. He exaggerates. Mom just believes that marriage means sharing everything, including finances. She's old-fashioned that way." "Thomas, I need to know we're on the same page. My salary is mine. We'll contribute fairly to our household, but I'm not handing over control of my earnings to your mother." "Absolutely," he agreed quickly. "I would never expect that. After we're married, we'll set clear boundaries with my parents. I promise." Once again, I chose to believe him despite the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. I wanted our marriage to work. I loved Thomas, or at least the person I thought he was. The wedding was just weeks away, with deposits paid and guests confirmed. Walking away seemed unthinkable. How naive I was. The day before our wedding arrived with blue skies and mild spring temperatures. It should have been filled with joyful anticipation, but instead I found myself dealing with one crisis after another. The worst came when I arrived at the venue for our final walkthrough to discover several significant changes to our carefully planned arrangements. The head table has been moved, I said to the venue coordinator, looking at the new floor plan. And these aren't the centerpieces we selected. The coordinator checked her notes. Yes, Mrs. Wilson, Thomas's mother, came by yesterday and made these adjustments. She said she had your approval. My stomach dropped. She did not have my approval. When I called Thomas about this, his response left me cold. Mum thought the original layout wouldn't work well for photographs. The centerpieces she chose are more elegant anyway. Does it really matter that much, Jenna? It's just flowers and table arrangements. It matters because these were our decisions to make, not your mother's, I replied, trying to control my growing anger. She went behind my back and changed our wedding without asking either of us. She was just trying to help, Thomas countered. You've been stressed about the wedding details. She thought she was taking some pressure off you. No matter how I tried to explain that this was about boundaries, not centerpieces, Thomas couldn't or wouldn't see my point of view. When I got home emotionally exhausted, my best friend Alison was waiting for me. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. After I explained the situation, she asked the question I'd been avoiding. Jenna, are you sure you want to go through with this wedding? It's not too late to postpone until you and Thomas work through these issues with his mother. The venue is paid for. Guests are arriving from out of town. My dress. My excuses sounded hollow even to my own ears. Those are logistics, not reasons to marry someone, Alison said gently. I'm worried about what your life will be like with Eleanor constantly interfering and Thomas always taking her side. That evening, I had a tearful conversation with my mother. Unlike Alison, she didn't directly suggest I call off the wedding, but her concerns were evident. Sweetheart marriage is hard enough without starting with these kinds of problems, she said. Your father and I had our issues, but we always presented a united front to our families. Thomas doesn't seem willing to put you first. He says things will change after we're married, I told her. My mother gave me a sad smile. People rarely change after marriage, honey. Usually they become more of who they already are. Despite these conversations, I convinced myself that things would improve. Thomas had promised me repeatedly that after the wedding he would establish better boundaries with his mother. The night before I was to become Mrs. Thomas Wilson, I slept fitfully alone in my apartment while Thomas stayed with his parents as per family tradition. My wedding day dawned bright and clear. I tried to focus on the positive as my bridesmaids arrived and we began getting ready. My hair and makeup artists were working their magic when Eleanor arrived unannounced 3 hours before she was expected. I thought I'd come early to supervise the preparations, she announced critically, eyeing my half-finished hair. I hope they're not making it too casual. A bride should look elegant, not like she's going to the beach. My makeup artist exchanged looks with me in the mirror. I forced a smile. Everything's under control, Eleanor. You really didn't need to come early. Nonsense. There's always something that needs fixing on the wedding day. She began rearranging the already perfectly arranged bouquets. As the morning progressed, Eleanor criticized everything from my choice of eyeshadow too dramatic to the bridesmaids' shoes. They'll sink into the grass during photographs. My mother, seeing my increasing tension, suggested Eleanor might want to check on the reception setup. To my relief, she took the hint and left. An hour later, as I was getting into my dress, I heard Eleanor's voice again, this time in the hallway outside the bridal suite. She was speaking to Thomas, who must have arrived at the venue. I hadn't expected to see him before the ceremony, and I moved closer to the door to tell him it was bad luck. Then I heard my name and paused. Remember what we discussed, Thomas? Eleanor was saying in a low voice. The family financial arrangements need to be established right from the beginning. Don't let her set her own rules. I know, Mum, Thomas replied. I'll handle Jenna. She'll understand once we're married. She makes good money, Eleanor continued. There's no reason why that shouldn't benefit the entire family. Your father and I sacrificed so much for you. I said I'll handle it. Thomas repeated his tone sharper than I'd ever heard him use with his mother. I backed away from the door feeling physically ill. What family financial arrangements were they planning, and why hadn't Thomas discussed any of this with me? I considered confronting them both right then, but my mother walked in with my veil and the moment passed. I said nothing about what I'd overheard. Perhaps I was in denial, or maybe I was simply hoping against hope that I had misunderstood. Instead, I put on my veil, fixed my makeup where tears had smudged it, and prepared to walk down the aisle to marry a man I was increasingly unsure about. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. I spoke my vows mechanically, watching Thomas's face for any sign that he was thinking about our conversation with his mother. When he promised to honor and cherish me, did he mean it? Or was he already planning how to access my salary? At the reception, I tried to push these thoughts aside and enjoy what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. The venue looked beautiful despite Eleanor's unauthorized changes. The food was delicious and our friends seemed to be having a good time. Thomas was attentive, keeping my wine glass filled and making sure I ate something despite my diminished appetite. But I couldn't help noticing Eleanor watching me throughout the evening, a calculating expression on her face. Several times I saw her whispering to Thomas, and each time he would nod seriously. My sense of dread grew stronger with each exchanged glance between them. As dinner wound down, and before the dancing was set to begin, I saw Eleanor tap her glass with a spoon. My heart began to race. This wasn't planned in our reception timeline. Thomas looked nervous, but not surprised. Whatever was about to happen, he knew about it in advance. Eleanor rose to her feet, glass in hand, and the room fell silent in anticipation of what everyone assumed would be a standard mother of the groom toast. How terribly wrong they were. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor began, her voice carrying clearly across the reception hall. I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate Thomas and Jenna joining our family today. There was polite applause. I noticed she had said our family rather than their marriage, but most guests probably didn't catch the distinction. As mother of the groom, I'd like to officially welcome Jenna and share with her one of our most important family traditions. Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes as she turned to face me directly. In our family, we believe in pooling our resources for the greater good. When Robert and I married, I managed our finances to ensure stability and growth. When Thomas started his career, he continued this tradition, contributing to the family fund. Confused murmurs rippled through the guests. This was clearly not the typical wedding toast they were expecting. My mother, seated at my left, gripped my hand under the table. Eleanor continued, her voice growing firmer. Now that Jenna is joining our family, it's time for her to participate in this tradition as well. She looked directly at me, her expression leaving no room for negotiation. From today on, Jenna, you'll hand over your entire monthly salary of $8,500 and every bonus you receive to me for proper management and family distribution. The room went completely silent. I felt as though I'd been plunged into ice water. Was this actually happening? At my wedding reception in front of everyone we knew, Eleanor wasn't finished. Her next words came like a slap. If you refuse to honor this family tradition, you can walk out of this wedding right now. We only accept full commitment to our family values. My eyes darted to Thomas, desperately seeking some sign that he was as shocked as I was, that he would stand up and put a stop to this outrageous demand. Instead, he stood silently next to his mother, eyes downcast, clearly uncomfortable, but making no move to contradict her. In that moment, everything became crystalline clear. This was what they had been discussing. This was the family financial arrangement Eleanor had mentioned outside the bridal suite. This was what Thomas had promised to handle after we were married. They had planned this public ambush to pressure me into compliance, assuming I wouldn't cause a scene at my own wedding. They had severely misjudged me. I looked around at the shocked faces of our guests. My mother appeared horrified. My friends were frozen in disbelief. Even Thomas's father, Robert, looked uncomfortable, though not particularly surprised. Without speaking, I stood up slowly. The rustling of my wedding dress seemed unnaturally loud in the silent room. I looked directly at Eleanor, then at Thomas, giving him one final chance to step in and fix this. He met my eyes briefly, then looked away. That was all I needed. I carefully lifted the skirt of my wedding dress, turned my back on my new husband and his mother, and walked steadily toward the exit. I didn't run, I didn't cry. I simply removed myself from an impossible situation with as much dignity as I could muster. Behind me, I heard gasps and the beginnings of confused conversations. Someone called my name, Thomas finally finding his voice too late. I didn't look back. Once outside the reception hall, the reality of what had just happened hit me like a physical blow. I had just walked out on my own wedding reception. I was legally married to Thomas, had spent thousands of dollars on this day, and now I was standing alone outside the venue with nowhere to go and no plan. I heard the door open behind me and tensed, preparing to face Thomas or Eleanor. Instead, it was Allison, my maid of honor, breathless from running after me. "Jenna! Oh my God, are you okay? What just happened in there was insane." Before I could answer, my mother burst through the doors as well, carrying my purse and overnight bag. Her face was a mixture of concern and fierce pride. "I always knew you were strong," she said, pulling me into a hug. "But that was the bravest thing I've ever seen." "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the circumstances. Allison already had her car keys out. "We get you out of here. The rest we can figure out later." As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of Thomas in the rearview mirror, standing outside the venue, looking lost. Eleanor was beside him, her face contorted with anger, gesturing wildly as she berated him. Even in that moment of personal crisis, I felt a flash of pity for him. He might have betrayed me, but he was also a victim of his mother's manipulation, though that didn't excuse his actions. We checked into a hotel across town, where Allison helped me out of my wedding dress, while my mother ordered room service and a bottle of wine. As the adrenaline wore off, the tears finally came great heaving sobs that seemed to rise from the very core of my being. I cried for the marriage that had ended before it truly began, for the red flags I had ignored, and for the public humiliation I had endured. My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from Thomas. I glimpsed a few texts. "Please come back. We need to talk. Let me explain." I turned my phone off, curled up in the hotel bed that should have been my wedding night suite. Surrounded by my mother and best friend, I felt devastated, but also strangely liberated. For the first time, I saw clearly how close I had come to entering a marriage where my independence and financial security would have been systematically stripped away. "What happens tomorrow?" I whispered as the night grew late. "Tomorrow you start rebuilding," my mother said firmly. "But tonight you rest." I fell into an exhausted sleep, my wedding ring still on my finger, but my future suddenly unwritten. I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar hotel curtains, and the disorienting realization that I was a married woman who had walked out on her wedding. My phone, which I had turned back on, showed 37 missed calls, 22 voicemails, and over 50 text messages. Most were from Thomas, becoming increasingly desperate throughout the night. The most recent text read, "Please Jenna, at least let me know you're safe. We need to talk about what happened." There were also messages from friends and family ranging from confused to concerned to supportive. One voicemail from Eleanor made my blood run cold. "You've humiliated our family with your selfish behavior. This tantrum will have consequences if you don't come to your senses immediately." I deleted it without listening to the rest. My mother and Allison had stayed with me all night, sleeping in the second bed in my room. They were still asleep, so I slipped into the bathroom to splash cold water on my swollen face. The woman in the mirror looked like me, but somehow different, older perhaps, or simply changed by the experience of the previous day. While my mother and Allison were waking up, I called a lawyer. It was Sunday, but a quick internet search led me to Patricia Winters, a family law attorney who offered emergency weekend consultations. She agreed to meet me at her office at 11. "You're doing the right thing," my mother assured me as she helped me change into clothes she'd brought from my apartment. "Getting legal advice immediately is smart." "What about the marriage?" I asked. "We're legally married as of yesterday. Does that mean divorce?" "Let's see what the lawyer says." Allison suggested practically. "There might be options since it's been less than 24 hours. Patricia's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown. Despite the circumstances, I appreciated her calm professional demeanour as I explained the situation. "Based on what you've told me," she said after listening carefully, "you have grounds for an annulment rather than a divorce. Since you left immediately after discovering this deception about financial control, we can argue that the marriage was entered into under fraudulent pretenses." Fraudulent pretenses? Thomas and his mother clearly had a plan regarding your salary that was intentionally concealed from you until after the ceremony. That constitutes fraud. An annulment would legally erase the marriage as if it never happened, which seems appropriate, given that you were married for less than hours before discovering the deception. The thought of having the marriage completely erased, rather than ended through divorce, was immensely appealing. Patricia helped me complete the necessary paperwork and explained the next steps in the process. "We'll file first thing tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I recommend communicating with Thomas only in writing and preferably through me, and absolutely do not speak with his mother at all." I left Patricia's office feeling more in control than I had since Eleanor's announcement. I had a plan and legal support. The next step was to face Thomas. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown that was busy enough to discourage a scene, but quiet enough for a private conversation. I arrived early, chose a table in the corner with clear sightlines to the exits, and waited. When Thomas walked in, I was struck by how terrible he looked. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled as if he'd slept in them if he'd slept at all. "Jenna," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Thank God, I've been so worried." "I think we're past the point where you get to worry about me," I replied, keeping my voice low and steady. Thomas ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times during our relationship. "What happened yesterday? I don't even know where to begin." My mother went completely off script. "She wasn't supposed to do that." "Off script," I repeated. "So there was a script, you knew she was planning something." His expression confirmed what I already suspected. "Not like that, not so publicly." We had discussed having a private conversation after the honeymoon about family finances, but I never agreed to what she did. "But you agreed to something," I pressed. "You were planning to convince me to hand over control of my salary to your mother, after we were safely married, after it would be harder for me to leave." Thomas couldn't meet my eyes. "It wasn't like that. My mother has always managed the family finances. She helped me build my savings and invest wisely. She thought she could do the same for us." "Don't lie to me, Thomas. I overheard you and your mother talking before the ceremony. You promised to handle me. You knew exactly what she wanted and you were going to help her get it." His silence was damning. "How long had you been planning this? Was this always the end goal, to gain access to my salary?" Thomas looked up, essentially his expression a mix of guilt and defensiveness. "Mom has been talking about pooling our resources since we got engaged. She has this idea of building family wealth, investing together for greater returns. Dad's construction business hasn't been doing well, and she's been worried about their retirement. She thought with our combined incomes. So you were going to use my hard-earned money to fund your parents' retirement without telling me." The betrayal cut deep. "And what about our plans, our house, our future?" "We would still have those things," Thomas insisted, "just under Mom's financial guidance." I shook my head in disbelief. "I've contacted a lawyer. I'm filing for an annulment first thing tomorrow morning." Thomas's face paled. "An annulment, Jenna, please. We can work this out. I know Mom was wrong to ambush you like that. I should have stood up to her. But don't throw away our relationship over one terrible mistake." "It wasn't one mistake, Thomas. It was a pattern of deception that culminated in public humiliation on what should have been the happiest day of my life. You stood there and let your mother demand my entire salary in front of everyone we know. You said nothing. You did nothing." "I was shocked too," he protested. "I froze. No, you chose a side, and it wasn't mine." I stood up, gathering my purse. "My lawyer will be in touch about the annulment proceedings. I'd appreciate your cooperation to make this as painless as possible." Thomas's expression hardened. "And if I don't cooperate, if I contest the annulment, we're legally married, Jenna. Divorce can take months, even years, if I fight it. Are you prepared for that? I hadn't expected this sudden shift to threats. Are you actually threatening to drag this out just to punish me?" "I'm saying I love you, and I think you're overreacting." Mum made a mistake in how she approached this, but her intentions were good. If you just sit down with her and listen. "I will never sit down with that woman again." I interrupted, my voice shaking with anger. "And just so you know, I recorded this entire conversation on my phone. Your admission that you and your mother plan to take control of my finances after the wedding will be excellent evidence for the annulment proceedings." Thomas's face went from angry to alarmed. "You recorded me. Without my knowledge, is that even legal? Oregon is a one-party consent state for recordings. My lawyer advised me to document our conversation. I'm glad I did. I hadn't actually been recording, but Thomas's reaction told me everything I needed to know about his intentions. As I walked away, Thomas called after me. "This isn't over, Jenna." He was right about that, but not in the way he meant. 2 days later, I was back at work trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, despite my personal life being in shambles. My boss, James, had been unexpectedly understanding when I explained the situation, offering me additional time off if needed. I declined, preferring to lose myself in work rather than sit alone with my thoughts. I was in a meeting when my phone began buzzing repeatedly. Excusing myself, I stepped into the hallway to find 5 missed calls from the office's front desk. When I called down, the receptionist sounded flustered. "Jenna, there's a woman here demanding to see you. She says she's your mother-in-law and refuses to leave. Security is on the way, but I thought you should know." My stomach dropped. "I'll be right down." When the elevator doors opened to our lobby, I found Eleanor creating a scene, her voice echoing off the marble floors as she berated the receptionist. I have every right to speak with my daughter-in-law. This is a family matter. Eleanor, I said firmly, approaching her but maintaining distance. This is my workplace. You need to leave immediately. She whirled to face me, her expression contorted with rage. You ungrateful little gold digger. Do you have any idea what you've done to my son? To our family's reputation, everyone is talking about how you abandoned your own wedding. I abandoned a trap, I replied, keeping my voice low but firm. Now please leave before security arrives. You think you're so clever with your fancy job and your big salary, she hissed. But you're nothing without my son. Nothing you'll regret humiliating our family like this. By now, a small crowd of curious co-workers had gathered. My boss James appeared at my side. Is there a problem here? He asked, his tone making it clear he was prepared to intervene. This woman is trespassing, I said calmly. She was just leaving. I'm not going anywhere until you agree to drop this ridiculous annulment nonsense and come home where you belong, Eleanor declared. James signalled to security, who had just arrived. Ma'am, you need to leave the premises now or we'll be forced to call the police. Eleanor looked around at the security guards, the crowd of witnesses, and seemed to realise she had miscalculated. This isn't over, she said, echoing Thomas's words as security escorted her to the exit. You'll hear from our lawyers. Once she was gone, James guided me to his office. Take the rest of the day, Jenna, and don't worry about this affecting your position here. We value your work, and your personal situation doesn't change that. I was grateful for his support, but humiliated that my private drama had spilled into my professional space. Eleanor had clearly intended to damage my reputation at work, perhaps hoping I'd be fired and become more financially vulnerable. That evening, I discovered Eleanor had taken her campaign against me online. She had posted a lengthy, one-sided account of events on Facebook, portraying me as a materialistic woman who had cruelly abandoned her son over a simple misunderstanding about family finances. She tagged mutual friends and extended family members, ensuring maximum exposure. The comments were a mix of people expressing shock, asking questions, or offering Eleanor sympathy. A few people who had witnessed the reception debacle defended me, but their voices were drowned out by Eleanor's supporters. Thomas called while I was still reading the post. Jenna, I'm sorry about my mother coming to your workplace. I had no idea she was planning that. Just like you had no idea she was going to demand my salary at our wedding, I asked skeptically. He sighed. I've asked her to take down the Facebook post. She's upset and not thinking clearly. Your mother is waging a deliberate campaign to pressure me into returning and dropping the annulment, I said. First threatening messages, then showing up at my workplace, now public character assassination. This isn't emotional reactivity, Thomas. It's calculated. What do you want me to do? He asked, sounding defeated. Tell your mother that if the harassment doesn't stop immediately, I'll be adding it to my court filing and seeking a restraining order. The line was silent for a moment. A restraining order against my mother isn't that extreme. Is it extreme to want to go to work without being accosted in my office lobby, to not have lies spread about me online? Your mother is out of control, and if you won't stop her, I'll do what I need to protect myself. After we hung up, I called Patricia and updated her on the situation. She agreed that Eleanor's behaviour warranted concern and helped me file for a temporary restraining order the next day. We also accelerated the annulment proceedings, citing the ongoing harassment as evidence of the family's manipulation and control tactics. What had begun as a private heartbreak was rapidly evolving into a legal battle with Eleanor, seemingly determined to force me back into compliance through any means necessary. But her tactics were only strengthening my resolve to break free, completely from her influence, and by extension, from Thomas. The legal proceedings began in earnest the following week. My attorney, Patricia, filed for the annulment, citing fraud and misrepresentation. As she had warned, Thomas contested it immediately, claiming through his lawyer that there had been no deception, merely a family tradition that had been poorly communicated. The temporary restraining order against Eleanor was granted based on her behaviour at my workplace and the threatening voicemails she had left. This legal protection provided some relief, but I knew it was just the beginning of what could be a protracted battle. During the discovery phase, we requested all communications between Thomas and his mother regarding their financial plans for my salary. Thomas's lawyer initially objected, claiming these were private family matters unrelated to the annulment request. The judge disagreed and ordered them to comply. What emerged from those emails and text messages was more disturbing than I had imagined. For months before the wedding, Eleanor and Thomas had discussed strategies for incorporating Jenna's resources into the family fund. Eleanor had researched how much software developers in my position typically earned, including average bonuses and stock options. She had created a detailed spreadsheet outlining how my income would be distributed, with significant portions allocated to paying down her and Robert's mortgage funding renovations to their vacation property and establishing college funds for Thomas's nieces and nephews. Most damning was an email from Eleanor sent 2 weeks before the wedding. Remember, it's easier to establish these arrangements immediately after marriage. Once certain patterns are set, they're harder to break. We'll discuss the details at the reception when she's less likely to make a scene. Thomas's replies showed initial hesitation, but growing acceptance of his mother's plan. In his final email, sent the day before our wedding, he wrote, "I understand, Mom. I'll make sure Jenna understands her financial responsibilities to the family. Trust me to handle this." When these communications were entered into evidence, Thomas's case weakened considerably. His lawyer approached Patricia about a potential settlement, suggesting that Thomas would stop contesting the annulment if I would agree to a confidentiality clause, preventing me from discussing the details of our separation. "He's worried about his reputation," Patricia explained, "especially professionally. If word gets out about this scheme to control your income, it could damage his standing at the investment firm." "I'm not interested in publicly humiliating him," I said. "I just want this marriage erased and Eleanor kept away from me." While the legal process moved forward, I received an unexpected call from Thomas's brother Michael. "Jenna, I heard about what happened at the wedding. I'm so sorry. I tried to warn you, but I had no idea Mum would go that far." "Thank you for trying," I said sincerely. "Your warning actually helped prepare me, even if I didn't fully heed it at the time." Michael hesitated before continuing. "Listen, there's something you should know. This isn't the first time Mum has done something like this. Before Sarah and I got married, Mum tried to get us to sign a financial agreement giving her oversight of our accounts. When we refused, she threatened to cancel the wedding. The only difference is we called her bluff privately, not in the middle of our reception." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I have documentation from that time, emails a draft of the agreement she wanted us to sign. It shows a pattern of behaviour that might help your case. And I think it's time someone stood up to her. She's controlled the family finances for too long, manipulating everyone through money." Michael's evidence proved invaluable. It demonstrated that Eleanor had a history of attempting to exert financial control over family members' resources, supporting our claim that the marriage was entered into under fraudulent circumstances. Additionally, Thomas's father, Robert, surprised everyone by reaching out to me directly. We met at a quiet cafe where he appeared nervous but determined. "I've spent 37 years letting Eleanor make all the financial decisions," he said, his hands trembling slightly around his coffee cup. "I told myself it was because she was better with money, but the truth is I was afraid of the conflict that would come from standing up to her. I watched her do the same thing to our sons, and I said nothing." His eyes, so similar to Thomas's, held genuine regret. "I can't undo the damage she's done to you, but I want you to know I've finally told her this has to stop. I've moved out temporarily, and I'm seeing a counsellor to help me understand how I allowed this situation to continue for so long." Word of Robert's departure spread quickly through Thomas and Eleanor's social circle. Friends and family members, who had initially sided with Eleanor, based on her Facebook post, began reaching out to me asking for my side of the story. I remained discreet, simply stating that the truth would come out in the legal proceedings. Eleanor, facing the dual blows of Robert's departure and Michael's testimony, escalated her harassment despite the restraining order. She created fake social media accounts to post negative comments about me online. She contacted my mother's neighbours, spreading rumours about our family. She even attempted to reach out to my company's clients, though thankfully these efforts were unsuccessful. Each violation of the restraining order was documented and added to our court filings. The judge, clearly frustrated by Eleanor's behaviour, scheduled a contempt hearing. Eleanor appeared subdued in court, a stark contrast to her previous aggressive demeanour. The judge sternly warned her that further violations would result in serious consequences, potentially including jail time. Thomas, witnessing his mother's increasingly erratic behaviour and the mounting legal evidence against them, finally reached out with a genuine apology. We met in Patricia's office with both our lawyers present. "I was wrong, Yao," he said simply. "I let my mother control me my entire life, and I was going to let her control you too. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, But I want you to know I regret what I did. I won't contest the annulment anymore, and I'll pay all your legal fees." Looking at him across the conference table, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Anger, certainly, but also pity and a lingering sadness for what might have been if he had been strong enough to break free of his mother's influence. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate your apology. For what it's worth," he added as we were leaving, "I am getting help, therapy. I need to understand why I let this happen, why I couldn't stand up to her." "I hope it helps," I replied sincerely. The judge granted the annulment based on the overwhelming evidence of fraud and misrepresentation. The marriage was legally erased as if it had never existed. Eleanor was found in contempt for violating the restraining order multiple times and was fined substantially. The permanent restraining order was granted legally, preventing her from contacting me or coming near my home or workplace. As I left the courthouse for the last time, divorce decree in hand, I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. The nightmare that had begun on what should have been the happiest day of my life was finally over. I was free from Thomas, free from Eleanor, and most importantly, free from a future where my independence would have been systematically eroded. Thomas sent me a brief text that evening. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope someday you can forgive me. I'm continuing therapy and learning to set boundaries with my mother. Take care of yourself, Jenna." I didn't respond. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. And some lessons, though painful in the learning, are too valuable to forget. The weeks following the finalization of the annulment were difficult despite the legal victory. I found myself experiencing unexpected waves of grief and self-doubt. Had I missed obvious warning signs? Should I have ended the relationship at the first hint of Eleanor's controlling behavior? These questions plagued me during sleepless nights. My mother, seeing my struggle, suggested I might benefit from talking to a professional. "Being right doesn't mean it doesn't hurt," she said gently. "What you went through was traumatic, and it's okay to need help processing it." I took her advice and found a therapist, Dr. Karen Martinez, who specialized in relationship trauma. In our first session, I poured out the whole story, still feeling embarrassed that I had gotten myself into such a situation. "What strikes me," Dr. Martinez said after listening carefully, "is not that you missed the warning signs, but that you ultimately trusted your instincts when it mattered most. Many people would have stayed through the reception, tried to smooth things over, and found themselves trapped in exactly the situation you feared." This perspective helped shift my thinking. Instead of focusing on how I had failed to see the truth sooner, I began to recognize the strength it had taken to walk out of that reception hall. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that the relationship with Thomas had contained elements of emotional manipulation that had made it difficult to see clearly. "Manipulators rarely show their true intentions all at once," she explained. "They test boundaries gradually, seeing what you'll accept, making each new demand seem like a reasonable extension of what you've already agreed to." These insights helped me process my experiences and begin to rebuild my sense of self. I took 2 weeks off work using vacation time I had saved for what would have been our honeymoon. Instead of tropical beaches with Thomas, I spent quiet days in my apartment, rediscovering who I was and what I wanted from my life going forward. I repainted the walls colors I loved, but Thomas had vetoed as too bold. I rearranged furniture to suit my preferences rather than his. I deleted our shared playlists and created new ones filled with music that energized and inspired me. These small acts of reclamation helped me feel like myself again. When I returned to work, I threw myself into a challenging new project, developing security protocols for a major client. My boss, James, true to his word, had ensured that the wedding drama had no negative impact on my professional standing. If anything, my colleagues seemed to respect me more for how I had handled the situation. One unexpected silver lining was reconnecting with friends I had unconsciously distanced myself from during my relationship with Thomas. Looking back, I realized how subtly he had isolated me, always having reasons why we couldn't attend gatherings with my college friends, or suggesting my work friends were too intense. Allison, who had been by my side throughout the ordeal, organized a freedom celebration dinner 6 weeks after the annulment was finalized. Surrounded by friends who had supported me, I felt genuinely happy for the first time in months. We laughed, shared stories, and talked about future plans with no mention of Thomas or Eleanor. "To Jenna," Allison toasted, raising her glass, "who showed us all what true courage looks like." Walking out of that reception was just the first step in walking into a better life. My professional life flourished as I channeled my energy into work. 3 months after the annulment, I was offered a promotion to lead developer with a substantial raise that brought my monthly salary to $10,000. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was money Eleanor would have claimed had I stayed in the marriage. I began mentoring junior female developers at my company, sharing not only technical knowledge, but also lessons about standing up for yourself in male-dominated spaces. Without sharing the specific details of my personal experience, I emphasized the importance of trusting your instincts when something feels wrong and not compromising your values for others' comfort. This mentorship program expanded into a regular workshop series that gained recognition throughout Portland's tech community. I was invited to speak at a regional conference about fostering inclusive workplace environments, an opportunity that would never have materialized if I had been funneling my energy into managing Eleanor's demands. My personal growth wasn't limited to career advancement. I established clear boundaries in all my relationships, becoming more comfortable with saying no and expressing my needs directly. I practiced financial transparency with myself, creating a detailed budget that reflected my values and goals, including a robust emergency fund that would ensure I never felt financially trapped again. Dating again was a gradual process. 6 months after the annulment, I agreed to dinner with Ryan, a software architect I had met through a professional networking event. I was nervous, hyper-aware of potential red flags, but the evening was refreshingly straightforward. Ryan was kind, respected my boundaries, and didn't press when I explained I wanted to take things slowly. Over the following months, we developed a relationship based on mutual respect and open communication. When I finally shared the full story of my almost marriage, Ryan's response cemented my trust in him. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said simply. "It sounds like you learned a lot about yourself through something really painful. I admire your courage." There was no attempt to control, no subtle manipulation, just appreciation for my experience. While I wasn't ready to label our relationship or make long-term plans, I found myself open to possibilities I had thought might be permanently closed to me after Thomas. As the 1-year anniversary of what would have been my wedding day approached, I decided to reclaim the date. I took the day off work, drove to the Oregon coast alone, and spent hours walking along the shoreline, reflecting on how much had changed in a year. Standing at the edge of the Pacific, watching waves crash against the shore, I felt profound gratitude for my escape. I thought about the parallel life I might be living now, one where my salary disappeared into Eleanor's accounts, where my professional accomplishments were secondary to family obligations, where my sense of self would have been systematically dismantled. Instead, I stood there, wholly myself, stronger, wiser, and completely free. The pain and humiliation of that wedding day had transformed into something valuable, unshakable confidence in my worth and unwillingness to compromise on fundamental respect. That evening, sitting on the balcony of a small coastal inn, I wrote a letter to my past self, the woman who had stood frozen at that wedding reception hearing Eleanor's outrageous demand. I never intended to send it anywhere. The act of writing was for closure, a way to honor the journey. "Dear Jenna," I wrote, "today marks a year since you made the hardest and best decision of your life. When you lifted your dress and walked out of that reception, you couldn't see the path ahead, only what you were leaving behind. I wish you could have glimpsed the future, not just the freedom from manipulation, but the strength you would discover in yourself. The humiliation and pain were real. The betrayal cut deep, but they did not define you. What defines you is what came after rebuilding with intention, establishing boundaries with confidence, and discovering that your instincts were trustworthy all along. There is no shame in being deceived by people who systematically manipulated you. The victory isn't in perfect foresight, but in finding the courage to leave when the truth revealed itself. Some lessons can only be learned through experience, and while I wish you had been spared this particular education, I honor how you've grown through it. You are not a victim of Thomas and Eleanor's manipulation. You are the architect of your own liberation. Remember that always. Life is rarely as simple as fairy tales suggest. There was no single moment when all the hurt disappeared, no magical transformation that erased all insecurities. Healing came in small moments, quiet victories, and gradual realizations. Some days were harder than others, but even the difficult days were mine to navigate as I chose. I never heard directly from Thomas or Eleanor again, though occasional updates filtered through mutual acquaintances. Thomas had moved to Seattle for a fresh start. Eleanor and Robert had reconciled, but with significantly shifted dynamics in their relationship. Thomas's brother Michael reported that Eleanor had been required to attend therapy as part of their reconciliation, though he remained skeptical about genuine change. These details held little importance in my daily life. The story of Thomas and Eleanor had become just that, A story, a chapter closed, a lesson learned. The future stretched before me, unwritten and full of possibility. If you're watching this and find yourself in a relationship where your independence is gradually being eroded, where your boundaries are constantly tested and crossed, where your voice is increasingly silenced, know this: you have the right to walk away. You have the strength to rebuild. Your instincts are worth trusting and your freedom is worth fighting for. The hardest step is often the first one, acknowledging that something is wrong, despite all the reasons you've been given to doubt yourself. But beyond that difficult first step lies a path to reclaiming your power and rediscovering your worth. Have you ever had to walk away from a situation that threatened your independence? What gave you the strength to take that first step? Share your story in the comments below. Remember to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of resilience and transformation, and share with someone who might need to hear that walking away is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your worth is not negotiable, and neither is your freedom.